Good evening, everyone. My name is Arelis Tapia. I am the school social worker at Clinton Elementary School. Just a little bit of background. I actually started in this district as a social work intern, and I have grown to absolutely love all the schools, all the kids I work with, staff members, and just really getting to know the community. I got my MSW from New York University, and I'm currently working on my doctorate of social work with a focus in special education, access and equity, actually. So I am absolutely happy to be here. What I'm going to do is we're just going to go through a couple of items, first starting with what is anxiety, what maintains anxiety, helping our kids manage that anxiety, and then we'll talk over a couple of resources that I've compiled. So overall, anxiety. When we talk about anxiety and how it manifests, we're looking at an internal sense of worry. When I talk to my students, I'm obviously K to 5. I follow a zones of regulation curriculum, which is not, it talks about zones in 4 different colors, right? Or feelings in 4 different colors. We have the red zone, the green zone, the yellow, and the blue. Green zone feelings are happy, good, feeling okay, feeling calm. Yellow zone, worry, excited, could be silly wiggly, but also tired. Blue zone can look like feeling sad, sick. It can also be upset or crying. And then the red zone, we're looking at, mad, angry, upset, even feeling like physical, wanting to hit. So when we talk about feelings, some of our students will report feeling in the yellow zone, worry, dread, or fear. Anxiety may or may not have a clear cause, right? Sometimes it can be because something has happened, so a trigger may have happened, or it could also be a thought. And anxiety can sometimes look like the typical response, right? I always like to use this image to the right because I feel like a lot of thoughts happen and then we have a lot of feelings coming up. And sometimes that's how I'll explain it to the students that I work with. The forms of anxiety can look like general anxiety, right? Worries, just thoughts, feelings. We can also have phobias. We can have panic, obsessions, right? Looking at things, wanting to constantly do the same things, which leads to compulsions. Social anxiety, right? What it looks like to come to school and just be very anxious about meeting new friends or interacting in the cafeteria or interacting out on the blacktop. Forms of anxiety can also look like our trauma responses, trauma reactions, right? Things that happen either at home or some sort of trauma experience that may have happened elsewhere. We also are looking at the pandemic as like a trauma that a lot of our kids have endured, right? Being in school, just a sudden shutdown of normalcy, expectations that weren't really there. So really an unfamiliar situation or event. What happens when our kids are anxious or they sort of have like an anxious scenario? They have triggers, right? So stressful or unfamiliar situation, event that cause those feelings of worry, fear, and unease. And then it's sort of like a cycle. They'll have a body reaction, and then they'll have actions, and then they'll have their thoughts, either verbal or visual. So what are the common physical reactions that we can see when someone is going through a lot of anxiety? Physically, they may look like they're breathing really fast or are actually breathing really fast. They may have butterflies in their stomach. They may need to go to the bathroom continuously, weak in the knees or wobbly knees, tense muscles, crying, shakiness, stomach aches, and headaches. And obviously, we do see a lot of these manifest in the school environment. Whether they're going to the nurse a lot and saying, I have a stomach ache, my head hurts, or sometimes, my arm hurts, but they're not really sure, but, they're sensing some sort of muscle tension. So what sometimes maintains that anxiety is sometimes when we allow or encourage like the avoidance of the feelings of that trigger, right? Sometimes those feelings are uncomfortable to process. But it's important that we do process them in order to be able to sort of cope with that trigger or that anxiety. Another factor that's important that happens when we're maintaining that anxiety is our thinking errors. So I want us to look a little bit at what thinking errors are for children. They have particular ones for adults, but how it manifests in a child could be like mind reading, right? If we encourage, I'm sorry, not encourage that, but mind reading is when a child, may assume or that someone else is thinking. So for example, you have student A and student B. Student A had an argument at home with mom about not wanting breakfast. Student B is interacting with student A in the classroom, and student A is upset. Student B will mind read and automatically think that student A is upset at them for just being them, right? And what happens now, this student B is anxious because they think that they're upset because something may have happened. Now, nothing really has happened. So how do you, have that conversation? We would hope that student B has the skills to be able to hold that conversation and not mind read and say, hey, friend, what happened? And friend A will say, well, I actually had an argument with my mom about breakfast this morning, but do you want to go hang out at recess? And it's happened. So sometimes looking for that clarification allows for the mind reading to not happen. Focusing on the bad, right? You ignore all the good and positive things that happen and focus just on the bad things. So sometimes I've had conversations with some of, my parents, and the first question after school is, did anything go wrong today? Or, did anything, make you anxious today? And sometimes that's really focusing on the bad versus like, hey, can you tell me, what was one fun thing you did at school today? Or what's something that you learned? Or did you see, or who was the adult that you interacted with the most today? That way, that conversation leads to a more positive focus versus focusing on the bad. Another one that we also see that's very common is catastrophizing. So you think that the worst of situations and obviously start experiencing a cycle of negative thoughts, right? So what if I fall? What happens if I make a mistake? And then that sort of increases the anxiety. So what we really do to support that, at least in school, and what can also be helpful at home, is we try to stay present, right? At least at Clinton Elementary School, we have Mindfulness Mondays. So our first messages on Mondays are about mindfulness and strategies that we can use to stay present. And this really does help with this thinking error. So sometimes I've had parents say we did a mindfulness activity in the moment of that crisis, right? Where they were really upset and we said, listen, let's just take a moment. Let's sit here. Let's focus on right now. And then we can talk about the rest. So that definitely helps. Another thinking error we also can see a lot is fortune telling. So you assume that something is going to happen in the future, right? Or something bad. And that, again, we connect it with number 3 and staying present and being mindful. It's okay to think about what may happen, but, we have to stay in what's actually happening right now. Number 5, blaming yourself, right? When something goes wrong, you tend to blame yourself and you say, it's all my fault. And sometimes that's where the adult comes in place, right? At least in our school setting, if something does happen, we acknowledge, especially when we do restorative practices, we'll acknowledge, what each person is accountable for. There really is no blame for that person, right? We're looking at just moving forward and finding a more solution-focused solution for all this. Labeling is another very common thinking error. So you apply a negative label to yourself, right? Which is, I feel like after the pandemic, we've had a lot of our students really go through that. I'm stupid, I'm too silly, and I'm worthless, and a lot of these negative self thoughts. So again, we refocus and we sort of bring them back to, okay, why do you feel this way, right? But we want to we can ask the why, but we also have to focus with, okay, what's the reality? What's the reality of this, right? Let's stay present in the moment. Your teacher said we had some great feedback about you doing this test, or it's okay to make a mistake, and always finding a way to relate it to. That's also helpful. 7 is minimizing, right? You downplay importance of something until it becomes just completely insignificant. Sometimes that happens with our feelings. Some of our students will, at least in my experience, in my practice, it's fine, it's okay, I'm not feeling angry, I'm not feeling this, but in reality, they really are, and they're repressing those feelings, right? So we always want to encourage the emotional language so that there is no minimizing of it, so that they can be able to see that support. And then later slides will talk about who can support. Number 8, jumping to conclusions. When something happens, you immediately jump to a negative conclusion and ignore like all other evidence, right? So a teacher, and this manifests this way in school, right? A teacher can say, let's try this again, or maybe, let's not do this, in a very, just we want to make sure you stay safe. We want to make sure that, everybody else around you is safe. And then the immediate is like, I am the problem, or I did this. So again, just redirecting that, jumping to conclusion. And then the last one that we also see is, feeling as facts, right? If you feel something, then you believe it. I feel stupid, therefore I am stupid. So again, redirecting that. And that's pretty similar to the labeling, except the labeling is just putting a name on it. And the other one is actually saying, well, I really am stupid. These are some of the things that are important, because the more we're aware of these, the better it is to support our kids, in the sense that we can sort of say, okay, it seems like we might be doing some mind reading. This is what we can do to sort of bring them back, right? It looks like we might be doing some blaming yourself. What can we do to not do that and encourage other, more positive behavior that can make them feel good? So those are thinking errors. Obviously, lack of coping skills, which, we, at least in my practice, definitely focus a lot on coping skills. Even if the anxiety is not there, it's always very good to have coping skills. The excessive reassuring, sometimes, we have to process those feelings. Sometimes it's not comfortable to process those feelings. And that is something that I do, that even as adults, I know I struggle with. Sometimes it's not, doesn't feel good to have a bad day, but sometimes we have to go through that bad day to, learn from maybe the mistakes that we made, or learn from the situations that happened. And I always tell my students, I always say, my room is the safest room you can come into. We'll talk about feelings. We'll talk about big feelings, little feelings, good things, bad things, that, maybe are bothering you, but know that at least we will always try to come up with a solution, right? It's always solution focused. You'll have all the space to do, and to talk about all the things that are bothering you, the things that, are making you feel sad, or the things that are making you feel anxious, but we will always step out of here with a plan to help you, right? With a plan to be able to bring yourself back. And then taking over. It's important, and we, at least at Clinton with my staff, we definitely try to check in. It's important that, our children develop their own coping skills. My room is sometimes, when I get pulled into meetings, kind of sort of like the free room, and kids will go in there, and those are the kids that know that they can go in there, and, with supervision of an adult, and just practice their coping skills, right? Whether if it's the calm down corner, or just looking at the feelings and just being self-aware of where they are, where they want to be. And I think it's pretty, most of the schools have different varieties of what that looks like, right? Where they have safe spaces, where they have a mindfulness room or a calm down corner. So that's a good way for them to be able to develop their own skills with the tool that's present. Overall, how can we help our kids manage that anxiety? The most important part, is obviously getting enough sleep, food, exercise, movement, connecting with family, friends, animals, nature. In the school setting, we want to make sure that they're connecting with their teachers and other staff members. I've worked with mind maps with my students, where, they just know who are their people that they can go to, right? Whether it's Miss Harrigan at Clinton, whether it's Miss Voodoo, whether it's Miss Correa, but they know they have a picture they have a face to the name, a place where they can go, and a place that they know that they can, sort of check in. So connecting with those and making those connections are really good. We also want to build on their strengths and their interests. Let us know, right? Tell your case manager, tell your teachers. If you want to do a little write-up at the beginning of the year, these are some of the things that, Ms. Tapia likes. These are some of their interests. It's always good to get like a little bit of a map. Even if they're working with a new social worker or like an intern, it's always important to know their strengths and their interests. Avoiding overbooking of activities. Sometimes it's a lot easier said than done. But sometimes, kids will report, I'm just really tired. I had a really long day yesterday. I had this. And sometimes it's like listening to your body, right? And I'll tell my students, how about we tell mom, maybe not today, right? At least that's the most I can, work with them on like advocacy, self-advocacy. But at least, they can speak up. And then the last one is leaving time to just be a kid. I know it sounds very simple, but also just like, just be a kid. And I say that because when I've worked with a couple of my students, sometimes we want like a perfect day for them, right? We don't want any uncomfortable things to happen, or if it does, then, how can we fix it real quick? But sometimes, that doesn't let them develop, and that sort of gives them an expectation that everything has to go good every time. And when it doesn't, then that's even more like anxiety producing or more disruptive. So sometimes just, letting them not necessarily go through the feeling, but at least you can process it with them, and then sort of bringing them back and say, you know what, when I was sort of modeling, when I was X age, I also sort of went through something similar to this, and this is what I did, right? This is how I advocated for myself, or this is how I was able to go through it, and this is what I did. Obviously in support with everybody else on their team that is there with them. Another strategy that I myself use, but also I suggest to parents, is the calm strategy. So calm strategy is in an event where maybe you have, your child who's either in crisis or just, very upset about something that's produced by their anxiety. Catch your breath, right? Pause to think, withdraw briefly to become calm, and plan a response, right? Sometimes it's a lot easier to be reactive in that moment. But just catch that breath first and then come back. Accept that, negative feelings will happen. You can wait patiently. They're going to cry. They're going to be upset. They're going to be in all the zones, right? Blue, green, red, yellow, and respond with, okay, I see, I can hear you. And then label that emotion, right? You seem really nervous. You seem angry. And if your child works with the zones, or, you want to check in with the counseling social worker to see what's the language that's being used. I can see that, Ms. Tapia talked that you're like in the red zone, or I can see that you might be in the yellow zone. And then most importantly, model that coping skill, right? Show your child how to remain calm and collected. Show them that it's okay to have that emotion, but what's more important is how we come back from that emotion and how we can bring ourselves back to that green zone, or sort of move through that yellow and green zone. So our coping skills, right, is the ability to be able to calm down physically, ability to be able to talk through that situation, can problem solve and create that plan B, right? So plan A, maybe this happened, we tried to do this, it didn't work out. So now what's our plan B? What did we learn that didn't work from plan A, right? And then body relaxation strategies, awareness of just the physical signs of the anxiety. Whether the student is learning what it's like, a lot of us in our practice will teach them that, right? Where do you feel when you're getting a little anxious? Do you feel it in your hands? Do you feel it in your neck? Do you feel it in your chest? But also you knowing that from your child, right? And you can have a conversation. When you feel anxious, where do you feel that? Do you feel that, show me in your body where you feel it. Your deep breathing, your muscle relaxation, and then your visualization which helps with a lot of grounding. The other one is strategies using your parent power, modeling that brave, encouraging, non-anxious behavior, being gentle, but also encouraging, and paying attention to what it looks like when there is non-anxious behavior. That way, when you do have these conversations and sort of help your child come back from their anxious episode and say, well, last time, or, what I noticed was that when we aren't going through this, this is how you are, this is the feeling that you show, which really helps them sort of come back from that situation. So if you're looking at like their thoughts, their feelings, and their actions, then you can sort of reframe that with them and redirect. Another important tool to use is just collaboration. Connect with the case manager and or counseling social worker. It's it's important, at least, I encourage my parents, send me an email. If little Johnny had a bad morning, just send it to me. Even if they don't have session that day, at least I know and I can check in. I'll be transparent with my parents. Sometimes I will say I may not respond immediately, but I know that I saw it and I know that that's why I need to check in. Again, because sometimes parents think that I don't need to reach out. I don't need to say that they had a bad morning, but you do. Let us know, because however they're transitioning from that bad morning will reflect in the classroom. And it's important for us to know what happened, even if it's the slightest thing. They didn't want to put on a coat this morning and now they're angry, right? And that anger can last all day, and we're going to try to figure out what it is. We're going to try to use all the tools. We're going to try to use coping skills, and they're never going to say it was because of a coat. But if we have a heads up, we can say, hey, we heard something about a coat. What happened, right? And then that can sort of open a more productive conversation that can help us plan. Updating, so that sort of circles back to updating to and from the teacher, right, their teams. If medication is involved, it's important that you let the nurse know, let your school nurse know, let the team know too. My child is on this kind of medication. This is the dosage. This is what the doctor told us to be aware of. If you see any signs of this, please let us know. It's important because we do spend a lot of the hours in the day with your child. And I appreciate an email that I get from a parent that will say, we bumped up the dosage. Can you give me a quick update? Do you see any difference in sessions? And I will say yes or no, right? But at least we sort of know that they are under medication, that there could be a reaction, and we can alert the parents if there are. We don't generally recommend any form of medication. We don't do that as social workers or as teachers or as case managers. But, it's always important for us to be updated if as a parent that is the route you decide to go through. So student support, student support. When we look at student support, it's important that the student connect with the school social worker. Even if they don't receive counseling, at least they're on their radar, who they are. A lot of the students will know the school social workers because we do so many other activities in the building. For those students that do have an IEP, at least for my older ones, I've encouraged a connection with their case manager. Because it's nice for them to say hello. They've met them at some point when they've done the testing, and they're curious. Some of them are curious, I got pulled for this, and who is this person? So at least they know that that's an additional person that they can trust, that they can check in with. And sometimes the building social worker is not there, right? I can be out sick, and it's good to know that they have that additional person, whether it's the school psychologist or the child study team social worker, that can sort of check in with them. Connecting with teachers. If there's a teacher that maybe is like a specials teacher and, they really want to connect with them, we can help facilitate that too, right? They don't necessarily have to always go to Miss Tapia or the social worker or the social work interns. They can, in my case, go to Miss Latimer for 5 minutes. And as long as she has a heads up, we're okay. So just connecting with teachers that they may have a really good relationship with. Ms. Harrigan, or at least for Clinton, or the nurse in your school, again, to sort of circle back on any medication that they may be on. And then, just to make sure that there's that ongoing communication between the school and home. Administrators as well. Every administrator works differently, but, a lot of them will connect with the students, and, they can do check-ins as well. Again, it really varies, and it really just takes conversations and team meetings. So communication is really key on just us working through different strategies. And then our social work interns. Marilu will, I'm not sure if she's on, but it's basically our elementary school social work program. She'll talk a little bit more about that. But
I am on Arelis. So
okay. But before we move on to that, I do want to talk a little bit about just what it looks like when when you should be seeking like outside professional help. We in the school district will obviously, in a school setting, we'll do our counseling, we'll do our related services, we'll, check the IEP, which is a live document, we'll have these meetings, but when the difficulties are really severe and they're manifesting more than just at school and at home, and we've tried strategies, or you've tried strategies, and they don't seem to be working. And now you're seeing that it's really affecting your parent-child relationship and even affecting like your own anxiety, then these are, really important points to think about when really seeking outside support, because obviously we are somewhat limited in the school. So I will move this over to our elementary school social work program.
Thank you, Arelis. It was great. I hopped on, for the last several minutes here, and this was a wonderful presentation. So thank you so much for offering that great, incredible foundation. So I'm Marilu Gregory, and I'm the field placement supervisor for the elementary school social work program. So this program utilizes social work interns, students who are getting their MSWs in a number of universities in our area. This year, for the elementary school program, we have 7 universities that are sending interns to us. And in each of our elementary schools, we have between 2 and 4 interns, depending on the school, that are placed there for this school year, or through April. And each of them come to the building 3 days a week and establish a caseload and work with students individually or in small groups. So the students that they work with are generally from the gen ed population, and some students with 504s. They get referred for services either from their parent or guardian, or from a teacher or an administrator who may see that the child is struggling in some area and could benefit from the support. The range of reasons that students are referred, or it has to do with emotional regulation or dealing with anxiety, or here Arelis has her screen up, but all of these areas could be any of the reasons why someone might feel like a child could benefit from the support. And it's school-based counseling. So the focus is to help a child deal with any obstacles that are making it difficult for them to access their education, to manage in school. And certainly anxiety over the last, 5-10 years has been on the rise, but definitely with the pandemic and the disruptions to education, I think there's been a real spike. And so I'd say for the students that are referred for this program, anxiety is big in what comes up for the students and why they're referred. The interns, when a case gets referred either by a parent or someone in the school, will reach out directly to the parent to get a little bit more information about what's happening for the child at home, what seems to be happening at school, any outside supports that might already be in place. And then the intern will also check in with the child's teacher and kind of get a picture of what's going on in the classroom, and then schedule time to meet with the children. So the meetings with the students generally happen during recess and lunch, that unstructured time of the day. But for some students who really need recess and lunch, and the parent feels that would be a hard time to take them, we do try to structure other times during the day that it's in agreement with the teacher or and the parent that the child could be seen. This year, I was a little surprised, actually. The number of referrals early in the year were quite high. So many of the interns started actually seeing students in groups, and now are kind of winding up that group work and also working with students individually. But, and it's actually worked out nicely, I think, for some of the children who have been referred to kind of connect with other students who may be facing similar struggles and are needing to navigate that. The interns are students themselves, so they take a lot of guidance from me and from the building social workers in terms of building strategies and approaches to the work they're doing with the students. But I have to say, I'm regularly impressed with the way they are able to establish really meaningful relationships with the children, and how just even having someone in the building that is there directly connected to them, listening ear, they're a supportive response to whatever they're struggling with, what a difference that can make. And so so I feel like they are an important asset for elementary schools, and I feel like they're busy all the time. But if in fact you have a child in your family that's going to be referred that way, I think you could count on pretty nice communication with the interns in terms of support over the time. And looking at what Arelis had said, similarly, I mean, it is school-based counseling. They're seeing the children for half an hour a week in the midst of their school day. And so if there's a child who's very, very, really struggling, in this instance, we'll say with anxiety, and it's really interfering with their ability to function during the day, or even take in the supports that we're trying to offer, there would be a recommendation, and the intern would share that with you, of maybe trying to seek some outside support as well. But I think from that's kind of an overview of the program, and I feel like it has been well received in our district for many, many years. And the interns work nicely in partnership with that large team that Arelis was talking about, with the teachers, the building social workers, the administrators, and the nurse. They're one more element of what's happening in the elementary schools to support the students.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself.
Okay.
Yeah, I put there's a QR code here on this slide, and that's the website info to the district, where you'll find all the other resources, but you will find the elementary school social work program flyer. In that flyer, you will see the parent referral link, so you can make a referral.
Thank you, Arelis.
Thank you. It was wonderful information. We do have a few questions. Let me pull up the chat. I had a couple of people send directly to me also, so. So the first one I have here is, the person is saying that her child has a lot of social anxiety and has isolated herself at lunch and recess. How does a parent help her child make connections, especially when it's like fifth grade, like a fifth grader, somebody who's about to go into middle school?
So I can jump in on that. I'm not sure if there was any preview work to that, but the first is reach out to, if the student has an IEP, reach out to the case manager. If the student's working with a social worker for counseling, have a conversation about that. There are lunch bunch groups, there are activities that can be done that can sort of help that student make those connections. So again, I'm not really sure. To me, the communication is key, right? Make sure that someone in that building knows that your child is struggling, right? It's an email. My child is not, they're isolating during recess and lunch. Is there anything, that we can do about that? And see where you can go from there. Okay. My experience, it's been that when I do get that, I'm on it, and we're sort of just like, all right, how can we plan, right? Whether I pop in for lunch and sort of, sometimes it's that they have certain types of seating and they don't want to sit there, so then they sort of isolate. But if we can make those arrangements, and that's sort of like an admin decision, but at least they're pulled into the conversation, and we can look for other ways to help that student feel comfortable and make those connections.
Right. I think lunch and recess is a tricky one too, because the teachers aren't there, right? So it's they don't have the oversight that they would in other situations to help kids fit in and be social. Okay, thank you. So school refusal is a big concern. I've heard this a lot, and somebody had reached out and said, what recommendations do you all have for school refusal that's from, an anxiety place?
Well, Arelis, I think you might want to speak to that as well, but I would say, again, it is back to communication as well. And I think often there's morning plans that can try to be arranged to help an assisted child and a parent when they're trying to transition the child into the school. And I think first we want to try to understand really the nature of what is causing the child to feel like they're refusing or anxious about coming to school. But oftentimes, once we can make a positive connection in the school, either with the school social worker or with an intern or a meaningful relationship with the teacher, there can be transition points where you can help a child take a step to get into the building, have some sort of routine that's going to help them feel acknowledged and supported as they're transitioning to the next step of getting in class. Sometimes it starts out with very small, steps in terms of trying to get movement on that. But I feel like last year in particular, coming back from virtual learning, there were many children, especially the young children who had not really had a school experience up to that point. And you found out over time with a lot of consistency that there was some success with that. I mean, we do have some kids who are really struggling in a much bigger way, but I think in general, that good communication with someone at the school who's there to greet and transition the child in has been successful.
Okay. I hear often that it's actually that it's something that's going on at home. So, I mean, I don't know, like maybe this also ties in with, like you're saying, like the communication, but it's sort of like as a parent who has a child who just will say, I don't want to go, it's like, how do you even get them over to the school? It's going to be overwhelming, I think, for families to go through this day after day. And I hear what you're saying, and I think that it's I guess that's key, is that you make the connection while the child or while the student's at school with the person, and then that's kind of the anchor, right? That's like what can maybe, like, once they have that person that they can connect with, that maybe that's the place. Or sort of emphasis to go, well, you're going to see this person today and she's going to help you, right?
And sometimes to be able to anticipate what the plan and routine is going to be. I mean, you're right. If things are happening at home, or I don't want to wear this, or I don't want to get out the door, or I'm not getting out of bed, or I didn't eat the right thing, that there's so many sort of steps and reasons that a child might put out for why they're having trouble moving on to the next place. But often, or it seems like many of the students, when they get in the building, can somehow then switch gears and be a little bit more connected and related in class. And so if we can try to help them anticipate, and there's a variety of plans that we put in place to try to help the child based truly on their need and maybe what they might be most responsive to. And sometimes it's a few steps forward and a few steps back, but it's that consistency of attention and adults that are involved that seem to really have some impact on that. And Arelis, would you want to speak to any of that as well?
Yeah, I mean, in discussion with some of our other social workers, we do see it is happening a lot. And we are also sort of exploring that and figuring out how we can support, like Marilu said, we're trying to do what works and trying to listen to the student, trying to listen to the parent, what is working, what's not working. We're also limited, right, in that sense of like, what can we do at home? At that point, we will refer, we have Perform Care, or we have other, other programs that can support in home. I know, at least for me, sometimes I wish I could go and be like, come on, Ms. Tapia wants you here, but we can't. And, I've jumped when we were still, virtual. We've tried the virtual, Ms. Tapia's waiting for you, and then they can come. So it really is just exploring, because every child is unique, and every child has, something that may work one day and something that may not work the next day. And we sort of have to be okay with that, and I know it's hard as parents, and I know it's even hard for me as a working professional who wants, your child to come to school and to be happy and to learn and to be with the other students. But, it is a process, and we're all sort of navigating through it.
So would somebody then, if the child doesn't have an IEP, then would they reach out for the social work intern program for this sort of concern? Like, is that the next place? Or, I mean, or do you, I mean, if it's not the teacher, like, you know, if they need more support than the teacher could provide, maybe.
So, oh, so I can jump in just real quick about that, because at that point, if we see that the struggle is really like the refusal is really impacting like their learning, and just it's not just I don't want to go to school and it's a gen ed student, then we may have to talk INRS, right? We may need to talk actually reaching out to administrators and to the nurse, and to there is no case manager because it's a gen ed student, but then really involving all the other people that can sort of say, hey, maybe it's time for a child study team evaluation or referral, or maybe if you want to get them evaluated outside of school, we can put in a 504 if they get like an anxiety diagnosis. So but again, like if we don't know that's happening, then we can't really be there and say these are all the other options that we can do with your gen ed student.
Right, right. And do you find that teachers will reach out to you in these cases? Yeah.
Yeah, they will reach out. They'll, put in the referral. We do require that the first contact with the parents about the social work intern referral is from the teacher, right? Because unless like I know the family, then I can say, okay, I'm putting in this referral because your child came to me 2 or 3 times. But most of the time we would the expectation is that the teachers are observing and saying, like, it looks like they may be struggling a little bit. This is some good support system, right? It's like tier 1 support, and then we're going to move on to see what else needs to be done.
Okay, right. And for anybody listening who doesn't know, INRS is Intervention and Referral Service, and just like Arelis said, there are different tiers to that support service. And if you watch our last presentation by Ms. Bedine, that's on the SOMSD YouTube channel. If you look it up, she explains all of it. It's an overview of special services in our district. So she explains INRS along with everything else. So let's see. So here's someone who's posted in the chat that he really appreciates the student intern program, and relatedly, he's spoken with some therapists in town who have discussed forming a volunteer corps to offer some of their time to the school district for student support. Clearly, there would be some hurdles to clear with this, but do you know whether the district has looked at or considered this kind of program? Do you have any idea?
For outside support, that you mean clinicians who would be available to see students who are needing additional support outside the school district, or are you talking about housing in the school district, clinicians coming in?
Will, are you there?
I am here, yeah. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I'm here with the cat. Yeah, I think, it's kind of both. I think I've talked to some clinicians that are like, if there's a shortage of people to see kids in the school, we could be available to give some of that support. So I guess it's kind of an open question, if there's any sort of similar to what the social work interns are doing to a degree.
I think my sense would be this, that each building has a social worker who is really focused and whose primary role is working with those students who have IEPs and the counseling support on that. However, they are really amazing resources in each of the building, and most of them have their hands on a lot of what's happening inside their building with their students. And so, as Arelis was saying, if there's a child who's really struggling on different levels and doesn't have an IEP, they would be someone who could then refer to the intern program and for that support. I would say the way the system works now, with the building social worker kind of in place and knowing a lot about the building, with the elementary school social work program, with a nice team of interns in each of the building, I feel like it's an effective support right now. I wouldn't say within the buildings there's a lack of support. I think there's a lot of good support in the buildings, and working with the administrators and working with the other staff members. What I do feel like is there seems to be a shortage in the community of resources for kids who may need additional support, who need more than what can be offered right now within the building during their school day. I think that became a shortage during the pandemic in terms of clinicians available, and it remains that way. And so to that end, if there are clinicians in the community who are opening up their practice, and even opening up their practice in some sort of sliding scale place that would want to provide support, that would certainly be appreciated as another list of a place that we could refer families who are needing additional support, that more than what can be offered in the school day. I mean, you have to remember, this is the school day, and the primary focus of the schools is for the children to learn and be educated. All of these other things in place are there to support them in that journey of education. But when a child is really struggling in a much bigger way, and it's really interfering with their ability to access their education, then it is really helpful to have those outside supports that a family can be referred to, and to meet with someone for additional help.
Okay, thank you. So for the zones of regulation that are used, that you spoke of, is that consistent through all the different schools? Do all the social workers of the elementary schools use?
So it varies.
Okay.
For example, in my practice, in my room, it's an option. And again, we really follow the modality of each student. Some students do not like the zones, for as much as we talk about that you don't have to be in a specific zone with that specific feeling. They would rather just check in about just all the feelings and point to a feeling. So again, following the student's modality, it can really vary. If you are curious or would like to know more about it, you can reach out to the counseling social worker, and some of the interns do follow that model too. Again, it's really finding what works for every student. They're just, they're interventions that are there. Some students really like it, some of them don't, and it's their preference. Some parents also use it at school, at home. If it's sort of consistent at school and they've had success with it, then I've made little cards and they put it on their fridge and they sort of follow that. And some kids just want feelings; they don't want the zones. Yeah. Would really have to check in with I would recommend checking in with the counseling social worker if your child is receiving counseling.
Okay, and so now, is there a generalization? You talked about going to home, but like back in the classroom, are those zones used for some students, or for the students that feel like they need to, or how does that work with like the teachers and collaborating or working with students who, they see you for maybe half an hour a week, once a week?
Counseling, I will sometimes work on a little card again, and they will have it with them. Some teachers have different types of feeling check-ins. Some teachers do like a slide and they have just bring over the thing and show me your emoji. Some teachers will have them put they'll talk to them what the zones are and have their name, and the first thing they do in the morning is put what zone they're in and what zone they are at the end of the day. So again, it really varies on the culture and the community of that specific classroom. But if you are interested in how your child checks in the morning, reach out to the teacher and say, hey, what kind of check-in do you do in the morning? Do you guys talk about feelings and weathers? Do you talk about feelings in this? That way you can sort of model that at home too. And then they can see that, oh, we're all in communication. We know that, we're doing this at school, so maybe we'll do this at home too.
I think that's really important, those generalizations, from school to home, because so much of the language you all use, we're not always familiar with. So that if we can like tap into that and, it'll, I think, maybe help that like going back to school connection, right? That making it all like a part of their day. All right, we have some more here. Let's see. So here's a question. Is there any kind of mental health testing similar to the vision and hearing evaluations that kids get each year? If a social worker or a teacher sees signs of anxiety or other mental health struggles through an evaluation or just observation, will they share that info with the parents? So those are two questions, I think.
I'll the evaluation piece. We don't really diagnose students, so I can't say your child has anxiety, I can have a conversation with the parent and say, it seems like, your child has actually said they feel anxious. And these are some of the behaviors that are, coming out from that anxious feeling, and they're feeling a little sad. And maybe we can help with some coping skills in school. But then if we find that it's a little more, then, my recommendation is maybe you can get an outside evaluation. And this is different to the child study team evaluation, right? Some parents will go see a therapist outside, and the therapist will diagnose them with anxiety. And then I'll say, great, come on over. Let's work on a 504 so that we can support your student. But again, like we do not diagnose, we don't really assess, but in that moment, we do have that conversation. Teachers may also say, they'll say to me sometimes, little Johnny seems a little nervous, a little anxious when we're doing this. What can we do to support? Again, we start with that tier 1 social work intern support, and then we move on. But there really isn't something like vision and hearing. But again, we can reach out to Ms. Harrigan, at least my nurse we'll see some kids who really visit her a little too much, going back to some of the physical symptoms of it. My stomach hurts, my this hurts. And she's like, all right, well, there's nothing there. So now we're going to talk to mom, talk to dad, come get Miss Tapia. And then but again, we start communicating, and that's how we start, making the choices and sort of making the referrals.
Yeah, it's interesting you say the nurse, because I think that the nurse, they see a lot of kids more than we realize, I think, as parents I know just, hearing it from my own kids, but just in general, I think that it's something that it's a safe space for them to go to, sort of like your office, but, that they can go and check in. And yeah, I think it's something for us to remember as parents, is to ask, oh, did you see the nurse today? Maybe that's a kind of clue to see how they're, how they're feeling also. All right. Is there a process for self-contained students to be referred to the social work program?
So I'll jump in on that. They wouldn't really be referred to the social work program. If they're in self-contained, they have an IEP. If we want to add counseling as a related service, then that's a conversation that needs to happen with the case manager, with the counseling social worker, to see if it's appropriate, if maybe social skills can be implemented in group or push in as a class or consultation based. So it can happen, but it needs to go through the case manager and through like a formal IEP meeting to see what kind of supports can be put in place. But again, that wouldn't go through the social work intern program, that would go through the IEP.
Okay. Here's some more. What level of support is there at Delia Bolden outside of school social worker who has not been able to connect with a student and get her in the school? High level of school refusal in 5th grader. So
you said it has not been able to connect with the school social worker?
who has not been able to connect with the student and get her in the school. So I guess there's a high level of school refusal happening.
So the student isn't even getting to the school.
Right.
Right. So, I mean, that presents a challenge if the child is not even getting to the school. I mean, I think, we would, so it sounds like the child is not coming at all. If the parent is struggling and the child is getting there late, but finally getting in, and then once we find that the child is in and engaged in some way, that is when we want to try to make some sort of plan along with the child, a 5th grader, to see what we can do to bridge that piece from home and school, using the social work interns, using the teacher, maybe the building social worker as well. If the child is just not even getting out the door, that seems like a problem that's going to be hard for us to directly address if we don't have access to the student to begin with. So I think, at that point, the parent should or could really reach out to the school directly and try to work in concert then with the administrators and the social workers there to see what kind of plan we could put in place, maybe to try to impact what's happening with the child at home to get them in. But yeah. That's what
Is this also, excuse me, is this also something that Arelis mentioned, perform care? Is this something that they would be?
Yes, so perform care.
Talk a little bit about what that is for people.
I will send out the flyer, but it is a state program. And in my experience of talking to parents, it varies. Sometimes they connect them with really good agencies that are very helpful. I've had some parents who've had really good success, and they've shown them what it's like to go shopping with a child that has refusal, or just like strategies in the class, like in the home. And they just offer services for everything, like anxiety, like on-site counseling. So Beth, I'll attach that flyer to this slide post. We do that, and then we do have families who will reach out just and sort of, it's not saying that it's not what we're telling you to do, but just, some parents will reach out to a behaviorist and sort of work on parent strategies versus like what are strategies for the child to follow. What can I do as a parent to support? And, they'll really go to the house and sort of say, well, if you're here, like, I've seen the work and it's interesting.
Yeah.
But that's also something that can happen, because again, like Marilu said, at that point we don't have access to the student. It's hard for us to be able to implement what we can if they're not even stepping foot in the school.
Right. Okay, so perform care. And we did have last year, SEPAC had a perform care meeting where they came in and spoke, and we have quite a bit of information now on our site too about it. So we'll share that as well. But that would be great if you have a flyer. All right, so it's getting close to the end. So let me just try to get at least one more question. Do schools have programs or staff in place at lunch and recess for those children who are really struggling during those unstructured, potentially overstimulating times? My experience volunteering at school is that there are kids falling through the cracks, and that the current lunch recess staff does not have capacity and or skills to identify and help them. Could there be a quiet lunchroom that is supervised, or a teaching stipend for a recess patrol to identify students in need?
There's a couple of points there, but I think, it really varies from school to school. I'm not sure what school Brenda, may be talking about. But again, just reach out to the social worker, reach out to your administrator. I volunteered for this and this is what I saw. And sometimes I've had it at Clinton where we'll have a table where kids just want to sit together because they don't want to go to recess, or we look for alternatives and they hang out and read a book or have lunch with Miss Connor. So again, if we can get sort of your perspective on that, and maybe, some ideas, we can sort of work through it and try to figure out what can work. We also do have kids who sort of advocate for themselves and say, can we have like a lunch bunch group? Can we do this? And we'll try to honor that too. So again, it's really trial and error, just trying to see what works.
Great, thank you. And just one more, I think, because there's some comments, but now we have, what training is being done for understanding of neurodiverse brains, as they do not respond to traditional methods and can be labeled as making up their sources of anxiety without up-to-date training regarding neurodiversity?
Are you speaking about for the staff?
I guess so. Catherine, do you want to unmute? Yes, she says yes, for the staff. Or is there like professional development and training being done for the staff?
I don't know that I can speak to that in terms of every building. I mean, I think they've professional development generally over the years has taken different focuses in terms of, we've spent a lot of time on restorative practices and what we're doing with that in the schools. I think that there are different professional learning communities in every school that may be focusing on specific elements of brain development and neurodiversity and special education pieces, or different programs that have to do to support students who are struggling in different ways. And then that gets shared out among the staff. But I think I can't speak specifically to specific trainings that have been planned of recent. I think it's something good to suggest.
Yeah, I appreciate everyone's time. Thank you, Marilu, and thank you, Arelis, for coming and presenting and answering all these questions. Thank you so much, and thank you all for coming. Please sign in if you haven't yet. I don't know if it's up in the chat again. Oh, yep, there it is. All right, have a good night, everyone. Thank you.